The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program, and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Welcome once again to our view on public safety. I'm Richard Aguiar, the Chief of Special Services and the Director of Emergency Management. My guest today is Lieutenant Michael Lepage, Director New Officer and the haze-mate Officer for the City of Fall River Fire Department. So, continuation of the last time we spoke, Lieutenant Lepage, now we're collecting all the Tier 2 reports.
Yes. And
when we have discussions regarding that, sometimes they still come in and you have a lot of corrections. Mm-hmm. So let's explain what some of the corrections would be and what's the deadline for all these things to happen. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Or good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to say the Tier 2 reports, they start off with, it's an annual filing. March 1st is the deadline for that. And facilities that have certain types of chemicals and quantities, they're required by EPA to send in an electronic reporting of the chemicals they have in their facility. So those reports come into me, they come into your office, and they go to the state as well. And once we get those Tier 2 reports, then they have to be reviewed by myself, and then you as well. You take a look at them. I know you have to make a hard copy for your files. And then, you know, if there's any mistakes or any errors, things that are missing in the report, then, you know, we go back and forth with emails and get those things corrected. But again, the March 1st deadline, so when this airs, that's already going to be passed, I'm sure. But the March 1st deadline is, it's a finable offense by EPA. It's $37,500 per day per chemical violation if they don't get the report in on time. We use those reports for emergency planning purposes. So if we're responding to a facility that has chemicals, we need to know that those chemicals are there, the quantities and the locations, so that we can plan our response appropriately.
So I know when you request the Tier 2 reports, you go beyond what the state requires. Mm-hmm. You want floor plans, you want locations of chemicals, mm-hmm. and all this is for the benefit of the firefighters. If they approach a situation, they know what they're getting into.
That's correct. And so as an attachment to the report, we're requesting that the facility would provide what we call a facility site plan. And in that site plan, there's everything from the chemical locations to fire department information that we need to know, you know, like where's the fire alarm panel, how do we gain access to the building, where's the water, electric, and gas shutoffs, things like that. It's quite a list. Another thing that's been pretty popular lately is solar panels on roofs of facilities. So we'd like to know where these panels are located and the shutoffs for that as well, because they continue to generate power. And just, you know, access, gate access, where's the Knox box, which is a little box that contains keys and contact information, as you know, to each facility. And we've done something new this year. Well, actually, we started it a couple of years ago. The city has solely converted over to a wireless transceiver for the fire alarm signal. It used to be hardwired to fire alarm dispatch, and when an alarm would come in for a facility, it would transmit through the hard wire, and now it's done wirelessly through what's called a Keltron box. But that gives us the ability to monitor other things as well. So facilities that have, let's say, ammonia and chlorine or explosive materials like propane, they typically have sensors in those tank yards and things like that, or where those chemicals are stored. And so they'll trip at a certain parts per million. And that signal could be sent over that transceiver to fire alarm. and give us notification that it's not just a regular box alarm, it's potentially an ammonia release or a chlorine release or an explosive gas. And that gives our firefighters the opportunity to ramp up and respond appropriately. One of the things they'd want to do when they leave the station is note the wind direction. I was always taught when I first got on the job, look at the flag outside the station, see which way the wind's blowing. Because you certainly don't want to be traveling into the plume. You want to be coming downwind. So you need to respond accordingly. You might have to go around quite a way to get to the facility, so you're approaching it. You're not going into the plume. So things like that. A lot of you mentioned site plans. The site plans are that's another initiative that was created a few years back. The department has iPads on all the apparatus, the chief's cars, the pumps, the ladders, the rescues, and on those iPads, all of the facility site plans are uploaded in a PDF format with other important safety information and response information. That's all there listed by address. So when we're responding, the officer, who's obviously being chauffeured, he's sitting in the passenger seat, he's shotgun, and the driver's, commanding the vehicle. He can look that information up on the iPad and responding, so he knows where the chemicals are, he knows where the fire alarm panel is, he knows where all these important information is. The whole goal there is to get our hands around an incident as quickly as we can, and by doing that, it'll eliminate injury and possibly even death.
So the laptops in the vehicles is something that you established.
Yes.
And it's relatively new. Mm-hmm. And it's a good tool for them to have, like you just mentioned.
Yes.
When they're approaching a scene, they can look it up and say, oh, we have these chemicals in here, so we got to be careful when we approach the building and put on our SCBAs, so forth, so on.
That's right.
Now, to buy all this equipment, did that come from grant money, or did the city budget? How does that work, LT?
The original set of iPads we got, there was 4 iPads that we acquired. It was through a supplemental environmental program through EPA. And it was a company that got themselves in violation, and as a result of the violation, instead of paying the fine to EPA, they have this SEP program where part of the fine can go towards the fire department to purchase equipment, and that's how we were able to get the first 4 iPads, and then the remaining iPads was through a grant, I believe. Mm-hmm. That part I wasn't involved in. I was involved in setting them up, but not involved in that as well.
So let's touch on the EPA. You mentioned EPA. Now, what role does EPA play in all of this when it comes to Tier 2 reporting, violations, so forth?
Okay. So EPA is obviously the federal branch of the government that, unlike the state, which would be Mass DEP, that's the environmental on the state. But the federal is U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And they created Tier 2 reporting back in the 80s when there was a lot of chemical incidents occurring throughout the country, and people in workplaces were working with chemicals and they didn't know what they were working, the hazards of it. So they created EPCRA, which is Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, and that requires that all facilities that have, again, chemicals of certain types of quantities report to the fire department, the LEPC, which you're the chairman, I'm the co-chairman, and the state, or the CERC, to let these agencies know about these hazards. And also, in conjunction with that, part of the EPCRA law is gets involved in safety data sheets for employees in the workplace so that they can look up the chemicals that they are working with. And it's a data sheet that gives you all of the information, from how to work with it safely to what happens if it catches on fire or if you spill something on you or things like that. But that's an employee's right to know that information. So it is beneficial. It's helped out quite a bit, I think. And I think Fall River, we do a pretty good job with that between myself, and work in partnership with the state. We try to stay proactive with the information. We don't just take the Tier 2 reports and file them. We use the data.
Mm-hmm. So one of our previous shows, we talked about school safety, education in schools,
Yes.
with Inspector Walker and Medeiros. So we have plans in place in the event if we have a plume in the area of a school, particularly the Doran School, and a few others within the city. Let's speak to how the school gets notified if we have a chemical leak, let's say at the Bourne and Remington.
Well, in that particular instance, we have partnership with that facility, and through the emergency response plans, they've provided Doran School with a two-way radio type of device, and they also have an outside siren. So if there's a spill or a release that warrants the evacuation siren, which basically sounds like a World War II siren, and it alerts the employees in the workplace to evacuate and get to a gathering location. But it also alerts the neighbors to a certain degree. I've been down there when they've tested the alarm. You can hear it at Battleship Cove, and you can struggle to hear it a little bit at Bicentennial Park. It depends upon the wind direction. We could certainly hear it at the Doran School. But just in case they don't hear it, the radio system that they have linked between the two, they'll notify them, and I think they also will notify them by telephone too, to shelter in place.
Yeah.
Because one of the things you want to do in certain situations like that is you don't want to, like the fire we had on Middle Street, there was a school right on the corner, and the decision was made by that facility to evacuate. And the students were in the streets, they were in our way, they were in the smoke. They would have been better off. The parents are trying to come get them, so it's causing kind of havoc, and you can't, obviously travel over the hose lines. And it's better if you just shelter in place.
Yeah. And I think this is where educating the principals come in, because if this should happen, and we had plans in place for that, as you know. Do not evacuate the school until we give you the order, shelter in place, but nobody understood that.
Right.
And it became a very precarious situation. South Coast Rail is going to be coming through the city. And we also have CFX, I believe it is.
Yes.
They, the carrier for chemicals to Bourne and Remington. And we have plans in place for that. Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's not just, there's also a Gold Medal Bakery that receives boxcars, flower cars along the rail. You mentioned Bourne and Remington, they receive materials along the rail. But it's not something unique, it's something that they've been doing for years. It was always, for a long time now, it's been a freight rail system. But with the passenger trains coming in, they're using the same tracks, so they've all been upgraded. But that kind of creates a little bit of a situation for us as emergency responders, because, I've actually been at a train derailment already in my career, and that involved a diesel fuel tank on a locomotive that got compromised. But they're going to be traveling at higher speeds. You had asked me last week, I believe it was, you were concerned about which school was it? St. Michael's School, correct. St. Michael's School down the north end, or I should say up the north end. I don't know why I get that down the north end. That was always something my mom used to say. I don't get it. But anyways, and you were the school. You're working with the school with plans, so you wanted to know what chemicals were traversing that rail, and I was able to give you that information. So these are the three corrosives that are traveling, and this is the corridor. It shows the rail track, and it shows initial isolation and evacuation, and then it goes further out as the incident grows. There's another set of lines, so you can actually see the corridor on like a Google-style map, and plan for that. So, and it would depend that the fire department would make the call as to whether or not to evacuate the facility or shelter in place. If it's a real deadly type of chemical and you're in the red zone, you need to evacuate.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't want, even sheltering in place, a situation like that, you'd really have to have a substantial setup for that. As you know, you can't have any type of outside air influence in that space.
Going into the building, right?
Right. Air conditioners have to be shut down. You have to put plastic on the doors and windows. have to have communication, you got to have bathroom facilities. There's a lot that goes communication. There's a lot that goes into the shelter in place for places that are immediately adjacent to.
And it's only a small window. If there is any type of situation where there's a chemical plume, we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. In a minute, it's a shut window to get it out of that facility.
Yes.
So the recommendation, once again, like you just mentioned, close everything down, and we have to make a fast decision. You're going to stay there, you're going to get out.
That's right.
And it's only a small little window, so we have to move very fastly.
That's correct.
So you mentioned plumes. Let's talk about the plume, what a plume means, because I don't think people really understand what plume is.
That's good. So some chemicals, when they release from their container, they become airborne. And I'm not speaking of the ones that just you spill it on the floor and it doesn't go past that. I'm talking about the ones that, ammonia and chlorine, for instance. Ammonia, if it's spilled, you smelt ammonia, I'm sure. We're talking about high strength ammonia. And some of these airborne, if it gets airborne, it can travel in ammonia situations as much as 5 miles. And chlorine's worse, it's 7 miles. And it depends upon the weather conditions. If you have high wind, you're going to get a narrower corridor coming out. And if it's just stagnant or there's no wind, it's going to tend to be involve a larger area immediately around the facility. So weather dependent, and when you run these plumes, you do take weather data into consideration. You always plan for worst case situations. But the plume is when you can't, sometimes you can't see or smell these chemicals depending upon what they are. Some will give off a cloud, and that's just the moisture reacting with the atmosphere, in the atmosphere and stuff like that. So you can actually see it. But the only way to truly know where the cloud is you need the meter for it. So with the software tools that I have, I can take the reports that generated from the facilities, and there's several modules, and I can go in and I can create a spill and plot it on a map, on a Google style map, and it'll show me almost like a teardrop type of plot, starting small where it's coming out and expanding outward, and it can envelop a few city blocks. It can envelop, like I say, 5 or 7 miles, and we know through planning on those maps we can turn on and off layers, so we can turn on all the schools or turn on all the nursing homes or turn things on and off. We'll know what's involved in that area of evacuation dropped right on the map. So we have some of these maps are already pre-planned for worst case situations, as you know, and they are also on the iPad under the emergency response folder.
So your job as the right to know officer and hazmat officer are pretty similar.
Yes.
So one of the same.
Well, it's a little bit. The hazmat part of it is, is obviously to do with the
emergency response.
Right, the files and stuff like that for what we're talking about. But the hazmat end would be, if there's a hazmat incident, I would respond to the scene and get together with the district chief that's on scene, who's the incident commander, and be a liaison to him, an informational officer. And I have all that information. I can, right there at the incident command post, I can run a plume based on the accident and give him real-time data and say, Chief, this is what you got. This is what we need to consider. Make recommendations to him, probably need to get the state hazmat team down here, probably need to contact Mass DEP, probably want to contact the National Response Center, things like that. Have all those phone numbers available. Fire alarm has all those contact information as well. Thank God we haven't had to. I mean, we do tabletop exercises, but knock on wood, I haven't had too many really bad incidents involving, other than that one chlorine incident that I had once. That gentleman got injured, but Yeah, we've been pretty fortunate, but it's something that you want to plan for, because you don't want to wait until it happens and then you're caught off guard.
So, DEP, if we have a spill, you have to notify them. What role would they actually play?
So, Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, DEP for short, they are the state environmental as opposed to federal EPA, okay? So they have jurisdiction over Fall River and all the other communities in Massachusetts. And so, let's say for instance, we've been getting a lot of home heating oil tanks in basements that are releasing just due to their age. They'll let go, and when they let go, it fills the basement up with, and if the tank was just filled, you can have up to 275 gallons of oil in your basement. So, to respond to that, I have equipment in my vehicle that we can use to help mitigate that, but immediately contact Mass DEP, notify them, get them en route. If it's over 10 gallons, then that notification has to be made to DEP. But along with that, the responsible party, which would be the homeowner, or whoever it is, the facility owner, or if it's on the street and it was caused by an oil truck, whoever is the person that's responsible for the release, even if they didn't do it intentionally, they are required to hire a cleanup contractor. And we provide them a list of contractors. We can't tell them who to get. We just give them a list. They pick somebody. And then if it's over a certain quantity, then they have to get a licensed site professional in there. And a licensed site professional just basically, they're almost like an engineer, and they oversee the cleanup, make sure that the cleanup contractor is doing it per Mass DEP guidelines. So there's a lot that goes into that. A lot of people don't realize. I've actually had or heard of homes that have been lifted off their foundations. The basement floor excavated, parts of the foundation. I actually had one where part of the foundation had to be excavated in the footing to remove the contaminated soil and then reestablish the floor and the walls and the footings and all that back. It can get very expensive. And I'm also finding that a lot of people don't have insurance that covers that. If you have an older tank in the basement, I'd highly recommend you have it looked at and possibly even replace it. With a double wall tank, so if it does leak, it can contain itself. I've had more than enough of those. Yeah.
So, not often, but we get spills in the water, around the battleship area or any of the boating areas. What's the protocol for that?
So again, Mass DEP provided all of the coastal communities, I'd say probably 8 years ago, maybe.
Oh, the trailers, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oil spill trailers. Yep. And Fall River has one, because obviously we're a coastal community. Somerset has one, Swansea. So these trailers house hard boom, 1,000 feet of hard boom, soft boom, absorbent materials, compressors, things to seal up storm drains, all kinds of equipment on that trailer. And we do have what's called emergency response plans, or geographical response plans, they call them. And that's a partnership with working with DEP, myself, other agencies, and we look at the water and we try to determine the sensitive areas. So Battleship Cove is a sensitive area. Further up Taunton River to the north, there's a lot of marshlands, sensitive area, wildlife and things in there. And so these GRPs will address those issues. So if you have a spill in a location that has a GRP already, then you would either deflect or divert or funnel the spill to an area where you can collect it and clean it up. And that's what the boom does. But the GRP is a map, again, a Google map, and it'll actually show you how to put the booms in the water and how much boom to put. And then you have to consider the tides and things like that. But again, Mass DEP is notified. Once we use equipment from the trailer, we have to let them know so they can replenish it. We have trained with Mass DEP. The city was just awarded a grant to have all 4 shifts, we call them slots, of men train on that trailer and do a live drill on usually it's down around the battleship. And we'll tow the boom out with our fireboat to a location where it needs to be, anchor it in place or stake it in place. So that's another tool in the toolbox. We haven't actually used it at an incident other than, like I say, just for drilling.
Well, thank you for your expertise, Lieutenant Lepage. That does it for our show. I'm glad you enjoyed the show today. Our view on public safety. Thank you.